Hey y'all, it's me, Steve. You know, I've been making this drive through the Ouachita Mountains for more than 50 years. I've worn out several pair of boots on these hills, and I've had a couple of really good dogs wear their boots out right beside me. Somewhere along the way, these mountains quit being a place I visited and became a part of who I am. I suppose I owe a lot of that to my dear mother, Sparky Mom. Her favorite job was working for the United States Forest Service on the Pike National Forest in Colorado. She taught me to love the woods, not just walk through them. She took me to Boy Scouts and taught me to notice the things most people simply drive past. Even today, I still wear her old Forest Service patches on my hiking jackets. Some things are worth carrying with you forever. Maybe that's why I always seem to find my way back here. I've been stopping at the Hollis Country Store for years, sometimes for gas, sometimes for a cold drink, sometimes just to stretch my legs before heading deeper into the Ouachita Mountains. A few weeks ago, my friends Hugh and Jody suggested we meet there for lunch. I'd heard that Donnie Crane made a pretty good fried bologna sandwich. Turns out, I'd heard right. After lunch, Donnie and I visited for a while, and before I left, he smiled and said, Steve, if you really want to know Hollis, you need to go spend some time with Miss Connie. Well, a few weeks passed, and then this past Saturday, I got the itch again, and I pointed my truck back toward Hollis. This time, I drove straight to Miss Connie Hawks's house. Danny Hill was already there. Before long, I realized I wasn't conducting an interview. I was simply sitting around a dining room table listening to old friends visit. Miss Connie is 88 years old, and she welcomed me into her home like I'd known her for years. The conversation wandered, just like good conversations always do. One minute we were talking about growing up in Hollis, the next minute we were talking about Charlie Mae Simon and the stories she wrote about these mountains. Then it drifted to Native American artifacts that have been found around the area, and before long somebody mentioned Jesse James. A little later, believe it or not, Bigfoot wandered into the conversation. Nobody was trying to follow an outline, nobody was trying to stay on a subject. We were all simply remembering. That's how stories are supposed to be told. While Miss Connie talked, I found myself watching Danny Hill almost as much as I listened to her. Danny spent 30 years hauling logs out of these mountains for Weyerhaeuser. I asked him if he had spent all of those years cutting timber, and he laughed and he said, No, I wasn't a log cutter. He told me he had tried that a little with his daddy until one day he cut a finger off. They wrapped it in coal oil and rags, and off they went to town. Danny thought they were going to the doctor, but Daddy drove right past the doctor. And guess what? Next morning at 5 a.m., they were right back in the woods. And Danny grinned and he said, That's why I didn't become a cutter. I just hauled them out. That one little story probably told me more about that generation than a stack of history books ever could. Danny was Connie's perfect sidekick. Every time she'd remember another story, he'd grin, he'd nod his head, he'd smile as if to say, Go ahead, Connie, you tell him. He reminded me a little of Ed McMahon sitting beside Johnny Carson. He wasn't trying to be the star, he was enjoying watching somebody else tell the story. Every now and then, Donnie would remember something just a little differently. Miss Connie would smile and say, No, that's not how it happened. Danny would grin and let Connie have the last word. You could tell they'd been doing that little dance for years. Then we heard motorcycles coming up Highway 7. Danny looked toward the window, looked at me, grinned, and said, Here comes the crotch rockets. The three of us stopped talking and watched them roar past toward Foose Junction. For a few seconds, the motorcycles did all the talking. Then they disappeared around the bend, and Miss Connie picked her story right back up where she had left off, like it happened every Saturday. Outside Connie's picture window, butterflies drifted from flower to flower. Hummingbirds darted around the feeders, and across the driveway, people came and went from the Hollis Country Store. Every now and then, another vehicle rolled down Highway 7. The whole morning just seemed to move at its own pace. Nobody was in a hurry. Listening to Miss Connie, I couldn't help but think about Arkansas author Charlie Mae Simon. Charlie Mae Simon wrote about these mountains. Miss Connie lived these mountains. Miss Connie remembered neighbors, schools, churches, families. She remembered the ordinary things, the kind of things that never make it into history books. Those are the stories worth saving, because once the people are gone, the stories go with them. After spending the morning with Connie and Danny, I walked back across the driveway to the Hollis Country Store. Donnie was there. I ordered another one of those fried bologna sandwiches I'd come to like so much. While we visited, Donnie smiled and reminded me of something I had completely forgotten. He said, I remember when you came in one time and bought yourself a sandwich, and you bought a plain ham sandwich for butter. I laughed. Out of everybody who's ever walked through those doors, that's what he remembered about me. One ham sandwich for butter. That's one of the things I love about little country stores. People remember people. The Hollis Country Store has been standing there since 1930. For years, it was also home to the Hollis Post Office. People didn't just stop there for groceries, they stopped to visit, to catch up on the news, to drink a cup of coffee, to solve the world's problems, to laugh, to argue a little, and to tell stories. Like so many country stores, those days simply slipped away. But today, Donnie and Gina Crane are working hard to bring that spirit back, not by changing Hollis, but by giving Hollis a place to gather once again. A place where neighbors still know one another. A place where travelers are welcome. A place where stories still matter. As I got ready to leave, Miss Connie mentioned she was headed to a baby shower later that afternoon. I smiled and said, "Well, drive carefully and don't drink too much." She looked at me with one of those little mischievous smiles and answered, "Don't worry, I will." We both laughed, and walking back toward my truck, I couldn't help but smiling to myself. Underneath those 88 years, that little mountain girl was still right there. Yeah, we'll be coming back to Hollis. There's still Iron Fork Mountain, the Civilian Conservation Corps, the old post office, the logging history, the families who built this valley, and so many more stories waiting to be told. This wasn't meant to tell all of them. I couldn't squeeze it into the first episode. It was simply meant to introduce you to a few of those people who made Hollis. Hollis. You know, I've been making this drive for most of my life. I've watched the seasons change. I've seen stores come and go. I've had to say goodbye to more people than I ever wanted to, but every time I cross into these mountains, something inside me settles down. Maybe that's what home really is. Not necessarily where you sleep, but the place that reminds you who you are. Some places deserve to be remembered, and some stories deserve to be told. I'm Steve Navoychak. This has been a Coroner's Backroads. Y'all be kind to each other, okay?